Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the previous videos, we looked at the concept of indexes. And in the last video, we went over in detail as to when you should create indexes and what factors are that influence you in creation of indexes. And we went over this entire list of what to do as the best practice. And then we also went over some of the factors that should be avoided and the reasons for avoiding creating indexes, and these we went over here. And I gave you examples of how to create indexes using the where clause and when to use them. And then obviously in the examples that we were using with SQL, I physically showed you the SQL statements that we were going to run against to determine if that query or that table needed a database. Well, that obviously was for demonstration purposes. In a production environment, you, in a sense, don't know what queries require indexes because there are going to be so many. So how do you determine what queries need indexing? Well, this is where one of the methods is to create what's called a trace. Now, I'm going to be running what's called a utility called SQL Profiler. And the primary purpose of SQL Profiler, in the simplest sense, is to capture all activity based against the SQL database, SQL server itself. These include SQL services and inputs by users also, and basically every interaction that's going on with the server itself rather than the individual database. So I don't want you to worry about at this time what SQL Profiler is because there's going to be dedicated videos to that concept itself. But just for this purposes, I am going to do it. Before we even begin there, I want you to do a couple of things here. And one of the things you'll notice here is if I expand SQL to database, expand the tables, you'll notice I've created another table called people3. Now this people3 has 10 million rows as opposed to 100 million rows. And for the sake of time, I don't want to run in my video scripts against 1 million rows. So how did I create this table with 10 million rows? Very easy. And again, I'm going to be doing this again in a different course, but right-click, Tasks, go to Export Data, and a wizard comes up. Now, I'm going to have an entire course on migration of data, but for this purpose, just need to follow along and don't worry about understanding this at this point. Select the appropriate data source. And obviously, this is the source database. So go next. And now we want the destination. And it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same SQL server in this case. And then obviously select the appropriate server name. And in this case, it's going to be the same local SQL 2014. And we're going to dump it in this same database. So it just may take a second just to make the connection. And let's continue in a second. And there we go. And I'm going to select the database, SQL2 also. Go next. And I'm going to actually write a query since I want the top 10 million rather than 100 million. So I'm going to go select. Can't type today. Select top 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 million, all from people. And I'm going to go next. And I'm just going to change this query. And obviously I called it 3, but I'm going to, for this purposes, I'm just going to call it 4. But you can call it whatever else. You can call it 3 because I've already done it. And just finish and finish. And this takes about a minute. This is a very quick utility, the import and export utility that allows you to transfer or migrate data from source to destination from various different heterogeneous sources. But I'm going to have a course dedicated to this. This is referred to SSIS packages. And beneath, below this physical interface, this GUI, there's packages running. But again, I'm going to have an entire course dedicated to that. So now that I'm taking that 10 million rows from the 100 million, and you can do that. Yeah, I would suggest you make a copy of the 100 million rows database and leave it aside So if you ever need it again, you can always go back to it. And you'll see here in a second, one thing I always like to do is when I'm modifying a table, I always like to make a backup of a table itself. And this way, when I modify the original table, or through deletions and updates and inserts, then if I want to go back to the original, it's just a question of renaming it. And I'll be showing you that in a second also. So this doesn't take long. It's almost done. I think that's 7 million right there. So this is a great utility for importing, exporting data from source to destination. So as soon as this completes, what we're going to do is run a couple of scripts, and I'll show you those simultaneous scripts in a second. And hopefully they'll be done in a few seconds more. And there we go. And if I expand the tables, go to tables, and there we go. Now I've already got a 3, so I don't really care for this. So I'm just going to delete mine. You don't have to delete yours, but I'm going to delete mine. It's just excessive for me. So the first thing I do want to do is, now that you've done this, for example, you've migrated the data, and this particular has 10 million rows as opposed to 100 million rows. And what I want to do now is make a backup of this. So the way you do the backup is the following. Let me uncomment that. Let me uncomment that right here. And as soon as I execute this, select all into people 3 backup from people 3. This makes a backup of that copy. And now I can work with the original and not worry about messing up the data. So that's what I want to do. And this will just take a few seconds, and then we'll refresh the tables and we'll see we have a backup. Now, obviously, all my courses now from now on are cumulative, meaning you're going to have to take SQL Server Part 1. When Part 2 comes up, obviously, this will be the requisite. And then I certainly recommend you take the Learn T-SQL from Scratch course also. So there's my 10 million affected. If I go to Tables and refresh, now I have a backup copy of this. So I can work with this. And so now I can just comment this out. And great. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to simultaneously run scripts. Now you have to imagine these scripts are coming from different sources, from different users simultaneously. So one user may be doing select everything where last name is Hansen. And if you notice here, I'm doing it what's called wait for delay. What this means, again, is that this will be executed first, and then it'll wait 5 seconds, because this is our minutes second. It'll wait 5 seconds. And then this query will be executed. And in this particular case, imagine this is another person, if you will, or another connection saying using a composite where clause, using the last name Hansen or Eva. And then it's going to wait 10 seconds. And then there's going to be an insert of a row, a single row with a 1,000,000th and one. And then you're going to wait 15 seconds. And then it's going to do an update statement where setting the last name to Superman with whatever is Baxter. Now we can confirm that first. If we do a select all from people 3 where last name equal Baxter, we should get this many rows, and we can verify that. And there you go. And there's a number. So we do know that the table has a last name with Baxter with this many rows, 9,741. And we want to just verify it when we do the update, which is this. So now what I'm just going to do now is, before I even execute this, I'm going to turn on the trace. Now remember what I said the SQL trace is. It's a utility that allows you to capture all the activities that is going against the entire system, entire SQL server, not only just the database. But again, don't worry about this, how I do it. I'm going to have several videos, actually, probably after the indexing concept, to explain how to utilize the SQL profiler. But go to Tools, SQL Profiler. A window will pop up. Let's connect to it. And here it is. So what I want to do now is, obviously, again, don't worry about this. I'm going to actually uncheck all these, because the only thing that I'm interested in at this point, now unfortunately this is somewhat tedious, but this is how a profiler works. Now this is being discontinued in the future, but I still like it, and you can still get a great deal of benefit from there. Had I not unchecked these, then I was going to get tremendous amount of data. Now again, as I said, don't worry about, one thing I do want is the database name, because I want to filter it by only that database, which is SQL. And there you go. So now I'm going to filter it by database name, and I'm going to go with SQL2. So this utility will, rather than running against every single database and everything utility, it's only going to get this much amount of data. It's going to get text data, application name, SPID, and database name for SQL2. And it's going to get basically all the transactions that are running against it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run it, and the trace has begun, meaning it's ready to detect anything that connects to it and any SQL queries. So as soon as I go over here and go execute, it's going to start running the queries that I've set. This is already run. After 5 seconds, it'll execute this. After 10 seconds, it'll execute this. After 15 seconds, it'll execute this. So we can just wait now. We can even look at it, obviously, at the capture. And there the is. There's the utilities that are being captured. And I think that captured everything. Now here, while I'm being very, very specific, and there's not a tremendous amount of data, here, when you use the SQL profiler, you get a tremendous amount of data if you don't filter it. So that's done now. I think it's just about to complete. And now I'm just going to stop the trace. So now that trace is stopped. And as you can see, what it's done is all the queries that the SQL ran against, it's capturing. It's capturing the Hansen one. It's waiting delays, capturing the Hansen and E one. It's waiting the delay one, and so on. So it's captured every single item of the update. Now, that's a great benefit, but how do we determine what needs to be indexing? Well, the first thing we want to do here is go File, Save, or Save As, go Trace File. And again, I'm just going to put it on my desktop right now. I'm just going to call it Trace 1. And I'm going to put it on my desktop. I'm going to save it. Now, what this did is take this entire file and saved it. So now I'm going to close this. And I want to go up here and go Database Engine Tuning Advisor. Again, don't worry about this. This is another utility that allows you to tune databases. And what I'm going to do now is direct this tuning advisor and say, hey, go to that file that I just created on my desktop, which is Trace 1, and open. And now it's going to make connectivity to that. We had selected database and tables to tune, and obviously ours is database. You can see that there's only 4 tables in that particular database, and that's fine. And if you look at the tuning options, it's going to look at the word indexing. And again, I'm going to be explaining in detail how to utilize this tuning advisor, so don't worry about it. And I'm going to do analysis. And I'm going to start and go general or progress. And it will just take a few minutes or a few seconds, relatively small. Basically, it's going to go through that entire file and look at each queries and look at each queries and determine and recommend if any of those queries need to be created a cluster again. And as you can see, it is recommending it. So it looked at those queries and now is determining, hey, if you click on this right here, and it'll tell you, hey, create a clustered index on people 3 with the last name, because that was one of the queries. And we can close that one. Last name, this was the composite. And this one is actually talking about statistics, which we taught. People ID and last name. Create statistics also. Create a non-clustered index on the first name. So this is a great utility in determining if you need this. Now, you can do 2 things with this. You can either save it or execute these. If we go execute or recommend, we can do that. Recommend all, and we can start determining what to do here. Now, I'm going to go to Actions, and I'm going to apply the recommendations, actually. You can save them, or you can apply them. I'm going to apply them, and let's say I apply them now. Let's see what happens. And then, obviously, it's going to those it's going to that file, and now it's recommending and applying all the indexing. So this is a great way of doing it. Now, this is a very general way I'm doing it. You would have to individually go and determine if it's recommended to doing it. Obviously, we only have 10 million rows. So as we've been talking about indexing, just because you can index a table doesn't necessarily mean you should index a table. This is where, again, the art comes in and experience comes in. But that is something you'll have to do in time. But this is a great utility in quickly determining what queries that are being executed against your database or databases need to be fine-tuned with an index. And then even if you index this and you determine later that the indexing is not beneficial through more testing, then you can always drop the indexing. And I'll be explaining that property also. So this is one of the ways that you can determine on your system, on your databases, which queries require indexing. And once this finishes, this may take a little while because it has to go through all these scripts. And then we can look at the data. So if it goes a little longer, then I may pause it, and then we could come back. But this is coming close to the videos about indexing. I don't want to go more than that. As I mentioned, indexing is a fairly easy yet complicated things. I've given you a fundamental introduction to what indexing are. However, with the knowledge that you gain in these videos about indexing, you can probably conquer about 75 to 80% of your environment and get an excellent experience. The next few videos that we're going to be talking about regarding indexing is going to be talking about what's called index fragmentation, where as you know, when you create an index and then you apply changes to the data, such as insert, update, delete to the data in the thousands of millions of rows, that also is being translated to the indexing. So eventually the index itself becomes fragmented, and we need to take measures against that. And I'm going to be showing you what to do in the case of index fragmentation. So I don't know how long this is going to actually. I'm going to pause this video just in case it's too long because I haven't gone through this. And then when it's finished, I'll come back and then we can continue. And we'll take it from there. So I'm going to pause it here. I'm almost done to 20 minutes, which I want to keep less. So I'll see you in a second. We're back, and it took about a minute more than the last minute I spoke to you. So it's applied those indexing. So let's just close this. Let's just close this. Close this. And if we go to people 3, go to indexes, and there you see those recommended indexes have been created. Now, obviously, the whole purpose of indexes is to retrieve data fast. So if we run this now, it should be fairly quick. And as you can see, it's virtually less than a 0, and that certainly is helping. What about the composite? That's pretty quick also. That's an insert. I want to verify that the Superman was updated for Baxter, and it has for the same amount of rows, which it did. So now you can see it's running a lot faster, and that's great. So now that if you want to repeat this and change things, what you can do is the following. You can right-click the people 3 that has this updated data and modified data and just delete it. Go OK. And then rename the backup. Just rename it back to people 3. And this is a great way of testing data. And now if I ran this, you'll see that I don't have any Superman, but I do have Baxter. So it's in the same position that there we go. And it should not have any of the indexes, which it does now. So if you want to play around with this again and create an indexing test, this is a great way of doing it. And that's it. So I'm going to leave it here because I'm approaching 20 minutes, but this will give you an idea of how to determine what kind of indexes and what type of indexes you have to create, and on what tables and what columns. So this is a great tool. So my name is Rafael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.